Vengeance's Cruel Chains, a saga of torment, sacrifice, and unforgivable loss. The day Nail's father died, a fire of vengeance ignited in his soul, one that would consume not only him, but Eliyan'a, the girl whose family he blamed for his loss. His father, a once powerful businessman, had spiraled into ruin, convinced that Eliyana''s father, a former partner, had betrayed him, siphoning funds that led to his downfall. The truth was murkier, tangled in bad deals and pride. But Nail, then barely 20, saw only betrayal. His father's final words, gasped out in a dimly lit hospital room, were a curse. "Make them pay." Nail took the vow to heart, his grief hardening into a relentless vendetta. Yet, buried beneath his rage, a flicker of affection for Eliyan'a lingered, born from childhood days when her laughter had been his solace. His stubborn pride, however, twisted this love into a weapon, chaining Eliyan'a to a life of torment. Nail inherited his father's wealth and influence, tools he wielded to trap Eliyana''s family in his grip. Her father, a weary man with stooped shoulders, was forced into a low-paying clerk job at Nail's sprawling company, his wages a leash Nail could tug at will. Eliyan'a, just 20, was coerced into a secretarial role, her desk a stage for Nail's cruelty. Their modest home, a sanctuary of worn furniture and faded photographs, was no longer theirs. Nail had bought their debts, holding the deed as collateral. "You exist because I allow it," he'd say during unannounced visits, lounging in their living room, his boots scuffing their table. Eliyana''s mother wept silently in the kitchen, while Eliyan'a stood tall, her eyes meeting Nail's with a defiance that both enraged and drew him. His heart, torn between vengeance and a secret longing, pushed him to hurt her more, his stubbornness a wall against his softer feelings. At the office, Nail's humiliations were calculated. "Eliyan'a, your work's as useless as your family," he'd sneer, loud enough for colleagues to smirk, as he swept her meticulously typed reports into the trash. Her fingers trembled as she retyped them, her cheeks burning under the weight of whispers. At home, his intrusions were invasions. He'd stride in, uninvited, and sprawl across their couch, his presence a storm. "This house is mine," he'd remind her father, his voice cold, while Eliyana''s gaze held a spark he couldn't extinguish. These moments fed his vendetta, but each glance from her stirred the affection he refused to acknowledge, fueling his cruelty further. Clara, Nail's fiancée, a woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper malice, saw Eliyan'a as a threat, though Nail's feelings for her were unspoken. At a company gala, Clara accidentally spilled red wine across Eliyana''s borrowed dress, her laughter slicing through the crowd. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her eyes glinting with triumph. At Nail's sprawling estate, where Eliyan'a was summoned to deliver documents, Clara's torment was relentless. "You're less than a servant," she'd hiss, forcing Eliyan'a to scrub floors or carry heavy trays until her arms ached. Once Clara made her polish silver for hours, her taunts a constant drip. "You'll never be more than this." Eliyana''s hands bled, but her spirit held, a quiet strength Clara couldn't break. Amidst this darkness, Martha, a gray-haired maid at Nail's estate, became Eliyana''s quiet ally. With warm eyes and gentle hands, she slipped Eliyan'a extra bread, bandaged her raw fingers, and whispered, "You're stronger than their cruelty, child." Martha's kindness was a lifeline, a reminder of humanity in a world ruled by Nail's vengeance. She'd linger in the shadows, watching Eliyan'a with a fierce protectiveness, her support a silent rebellion against Nail's tyranny. One humid night, Nail's control shattered. Drunk on whiskey, his rage and buried desire collided in a storm of destruction. Eliyan'a was alone at home, her parents visiting a sick relative. The door groaned open, and Nail stumbled in, his shirt half unbuttoned, his eyes glassy with intoxication. "Eliyan'a," he slurred, his voice a low growl laced with something softer, a longing he couldn't name. "You think you can defy me forever?" She backed away, her heart pounding. "Nail, you're drunk! Leave!" she said, her voice firm but trembling. He lunged, his hands seizing her shoulders, pinning her against the wall. A glass lamp crashed to the floor, shards glinting like broken stars in the moonlight. "Your family destroyed mine?" he hissed, his breath hot and sour. Eliyan'a fought, her nails clawing his arms, her kicks desperate but futile against his strength. His weight crushed her, his hands tearing at her clothes, the fabric ripping in the oppressive silence. The room seemed to close in, her stifled cries swallowed by the night. Time stretched, each moment a blade carving into her soul. Her resistance weakened, not from surrender but exhaustion, as Nail's drunken fury claimed what was never his to take. When it was over, he slumped beside her, muttering her name, a twisted mix of remorse and possession. leaving Eliana curled on the floor, her body bruised, her spirit fractured but clinging to life for her family's sake. She wanted to scream, to flee, but her love for them anchored her, a chain as heavy as Nail's vengeance. Weeks later, Clara's jealousy festered into a new torment. Convinced Eliana was stealing Nail's attention, she summoned her to a cold, windowless room at Nail's estate, where a tray of needles and vials gleamed under harsh lights. "Nail wants your blood," Clara lied, her smile venomous, "to pay for your family's sins." Eliana, still aching from Nail's assault, shook her head. "This isn't right," she whispered, but Clara's laughter cut her off. Leather straps bound her wrists to a chair, her heart pounding as Clara plunged the first needle into her arm, slow and deliberate. Blood trickled into a vial, then another, as Clara twisted the needle, drawing a sharp gasp. "Does it sting?" she taunted, her fingers cold against Eliana's skin. The process dragged on, vial after vial, each prick a calculated act of cruelty. Eliana's vision blurred, her head lolling, her body trembling as her strength drained. Clara's taunts filled the air, a relentless assault. "You're nothing, less than nothing." Her laughter echoed, a cruel melody, as Eliana's skin paled to a ghostly white. When Clara finally stopped, Eliana was barely conscious, slumped in the chair, her hope a flickering ember in the darkness. Eliana discovered her pregnancy soon after, a truth that filled her with both terror and fierce resolve. She wanted this child, a beacon of life amidst her suffering, a reason to endure. Returning from the hospital, she confronted Nail in his dimly lit study, her hands cradling her stomach protectively. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. Nail's face twisted, his stubborn pride drowning the affection he felt, but refused to admit. "That child isn't mine," he spat, stepping closer, his eyes blazing with doubt. "Who did you sleep with, Eliana?" Her heart shattered, his words a deeper wound than any needle. "You know it's yours," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You did this!" But Nail's vengeance and pride blinded him. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "We're going to the hospital, now!" The drive was silent, the city lights a blur of despair. At the hospital, Nail paced the sterile waiting room, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. Nurses cast wary glances, sensing the storm in his eyes. Minutes stretched into hours, the clock's ticks a relentless drumbeat. Nail's mind churned. Memories of Eliana's childhood smile clashed with his cruel accusations. Guilt gnawed, but his pride held firm, refusing to yield. Behind closed doors, Eliana underwent tests, her resolve to keep her child unwavering, though her body weakened with each passing moment. Eliana's grandfather, a frail man with trembling hands, sought Nail out at the estate. "She's suffered enough," he pleaded, his voice cracking, his eyes wet with desperation. "Let her go for mercy's sake." Nail turned away, his jaw tight, but the old man's words burrowed into his soul, a seed of doubt in his vendetta. Martha, ever loyal, continued her quiet support, slipping Eliana blankets and whispering, "Hold on, child. You're a fighter." Her fierce belief in Eliana was a stark contrast to Nail's cruelty, a reminder of the humanity he'd forsaken. But Eliana's body could bear no more. The trauma of Nail's assault, Clara's bloodletting, and the pregnancy's strain overwhelmed her fragile frame. In a sterile hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines, she fought to protect her unborn child. Her breaths grew shallow, her hands clutching her stomach as if to shield the life within. Nurses moved frantically, their voices hushed but urgent, as monitors beeped a slowing rhythm. Eliana's eyes, once bright with defiance, dimmed, her thoughts fixed on her child, a symbol of hope she'd never see grow. The room grew heavy, the air thick with the weight of her sacrifice. Time seemed to pause, each second a testament to her unyielding love. Her final breath was a whisper, a silent vow to her child, as her life slipped away, leaving the room cold and still. A nurse emerged, her face pale, and approached Nail, who stood frozen in the hallway. "She's gone," she said softly. "And the baby, too." The words struck like a hammer, shattering Nail's world. He stumbled into the room, his eyes falling on Eliana's still form, her face serene yet pale, her hands still curved protectively over her stomach. The sight burned into him, a mirror reflecting the monster he'd become. His shame erupted, a tidal wave of regret and self-loathing. He sank to his knees beside her bed, his hands trembling as he reached for her cold fingers, unable to touch them. "Eliana," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean—" His words choked off, drowned by sobs that shook his frame. The hospital room, stark and silent, became a prison for his guilt. He saw every moment, her defiance in the office, her pain during his assault, her quiet strength under Clara's needles, her resolve to keep her child, and how his stubborn vengeance had crushed it all. He'd loved her, he realized too late, but his pride had twisted that love into cruelty. Hours passed, but Nail couldn't move. Nurses stepped around him, their pitying glances like knives. The weight of his actions pressed down, her family's suffering, her violation, the child she'd wanted to save, all lost because of him. He saw Clara's cruelty as an extension of his own, her needles a tool of his vendetta. Her grandfather's plea echoed, a condemnation of his heartlessness. Even Martha's kindness, which he'd ignored, felt like an accusation. His guilt was a living thing, clawing at his chest, a chain heavier than any he'd forged for Eliana. Nail wandered from the hospital into the dawn, the city gray and lifeless. His estate, once a symbol of power, was now a hollow tomb. Every room held Eliana's ghost, her voice, her eyes, her sacrifice. He saw her in the study where she'd told him of her pregnancy, in the hall where Clara had taunted her, in the shadows where Martha had offered her solace. His shame was a relentless shadow, following him through empty corridors. He'd destroyed the one person he'd loved, the one whose kindness had once softened his heart. The child she'd wanted to save was gone, and with it, any hope of redemption. Nail's vengeance had won, but the victory was ash, a chain binding him to an eternity of guilt, with Eliana's memory as his only companion in the darkness.